Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the release of Generations United's newest toolkit, Latino Grandfamilies, Helping Children Thrive Through Connection to Family and Cultural Identity. I'm Lynette Fraga, Chief Executive Officer of Child Care Aware of America and proud Generations United board member. I am so glad all of you are joining us today as Generations United releases this new and timely toolkit. So before we get started, I want to go over, of course, a few housekeeping items. As you can see, we are using Zoom webinar today, so you won't be able to see your fellow participants' faces, but we still encourage you to use the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen to connect with one another. You can help warm up that chat box right now by sharing your name and where you are from. The slides and a recording of today's events will be available after the event. Everyone who attends today will receive an email with links to those, and they will also be posted to Generation United's website. And lastly, I want to invite all of you to join us on social media today using the hashtag Latino Grandfamilies. So we have a great lineup of speakers joining us to talk about how to best serve Latino grandfamilies. Grandfamilies, or kinship families, are families where grandparents, other relatives, or close family friends are raising children. Over the last 5 years, Generations United has been working on projects with a special focus on addressing racial equity in grandfamilies. This work has been made possible by support from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. The focus of these projects is to improve culturally appropriate supports and services to grandfamilies by building on their strengths and elevating their diverse voices, their perspectives and expertise to inform and influence policy, practice, and research. Last year, Generations United released 2 toolkits focused on promoting racial equity and culturally appropriate services. One focused on American Indian and Alaska Native grandfamilies, and one focused on African American grandfamilies. Today, we are releasing the 3rd toolkit in this series, Latino Grandfamilies, Helping Children Thrive Through Connection to Family and Cultural Identity. The toolkit is now online, and you can find it on the homepage of the Generations United website at www.gu.org or via the direct link in the chat. All 3 toolkits are designed to give resources and tips to child welfare agencies, other government agencies, and nonprofit organizations so they can better serve these grandfamilies. They explore the unique strengths and challenges of these grandfamilies, which agencies and organizations need to recognize in order to provide culturally appropriate supportive services. Given my having the mic in the moment, just want to share a point of personal connection to this work. Though not raised by my grandparents, my mother's mother and my father's father both lived with my parents for a number of years, while my youngest sister still at home in an elementary school, and my older sister and I in college. The positive impacts and the unique experiences during such formative years for us 3 sisters living in a multi-generational home were and are immense, particularly related to building on the strengths and recognizing unique challenges of a multi-generational home, and importantly, the unique opportunities and influence in forming and influencing my personal Latina identity. Honoring culture and perspectives of their and my lived experience, so important to me growing up and today. And as we move through this report and listen today, I am eager to learn and hear from these amazing panelists and this impactful report, honoring cultural context as it relates to grandfamilies. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Ariana Cisneros, our program officer at the W. Kellogg Foundation. Ariana was unable to join us live today, so she sent us this video.
Hi, my name is Ariana Cisneros, and I'm a program officer at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Our focus at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation has always been children. We know that if we want children to thrive, their families need to be able to support themselves, and their communities need to be equitable places of opportunity. We also know that families can take different forms, and that millions of children each year are raised by their grandparents. That is why we support Generations United's commitment to continuously elevating the unique strengths and needs of grandfamilies by ensuring that their voices, perspectives, and expertise help inform and influence policy, practice, and research. Today, we are proud to celebrate the creation and dissemination of the Latinx Toolkit, the latest in a collection of toolkits that help diverse grandfamilies receive culturally appropriate services and supports for themselves and for the children in their care. By influencing perspectives, perceptions, and behaviors, the toolkits can help us all to more effectively support grandfamilies so that children can thrive. However, we recognize racism's powerful and lasting effect on the lives of children, their families, and their communities. Embedded within all we do at the Kellogg Foundation is our commitment to advancing racial equity and racial healing, to developing leaders, and to engaging communities in solving their own problems. We call these our DNA, and that is the lens through which we view all of our work, because we believe that it is in the intersection of racial equity, community engagement, and leadership that lasting outcomes for children are achieved. We also believe that racial equity requires both systems transformation and racial healing in order to restore individuals and communities to wholeness, to repair the damage caused by racism, and to transform societal structures into ones that affirm their inherent value of all people. So on behalf of the Kellogg Foundation, thank you, Generations United, and all your supporters for the important work you do to change policies and systems, and ultimately to improve the lives of children, youth, and older people so that we may all benefit.
Thank you, Ariana.
Hi, my name is Ariana.
Thank you so much, Ariana. And thank you to the W.K. Kellogg Foundation for your support and partnership on this important work. Now, to share an overview of the toolkit with us, we have the lead author of the toolkit, Dr. Christina Lovato. Christina is an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at California State University, Long Beach. Dr. Lovato.
Thank you so much, Lynette. Thank you all for joining us today. We are thrilled to release this innovative toolkit, which fills a critical gap in helping organizations and service providers better understand the needs of Latino grandfamilies. I am so honored to have been invited to serve as the lead author of this toolkit. I spent years in the field as a bilingual child welfare social worker in New York and San Francisco, and my research focuses on enhancing Latino and immigrant family well-being. These practice-based and research-related experiences have informed my knowledge in writing this toolkit. The release of this toolkit is extremely timely and highlights many important issues that Latino grandfamilies face that practitioners can benefit learning from. For example, in the United States, about 58% of foster youth are children of color, compared with 42% of all children in the United States. This example of racial disproportionality results from structural and institutional racism in the child welfare system and in society at large. It is no surprise, therefore, that Latino families involved in the child welfare system face additional barriers compared to their non-Latino counterparts, including accessing services, language difficulties, and immigration challenges. Furthermore, as we all know very well, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated systemic inequalities in the US economy and healthcare system, significantly impacting communities of color and Latino immigrant communities in accessing services and support. This toolkit provides valuable information on the importance of kinship care, which is a familial practice in Latino families. Latinos have a long history of helping raise children in need of temporary or permanent families, and generally exhibit a willingness to assist other families based on a strong value of community and an emphasis on family. This toolkit contains concrete recommendations for practitioners, including strategies for service provision that integrates cultural beliefs, traditions, customs, and traditions that are aligned with trauma-informed care. It also provides tips to empower providers in supporting families dealing with challenging stressors, such as the restrictive immigration climate that we all exist in, that promotes fear oftentimes in accessing any kind of support. This toolkit also offers useful ideas on how to support families in dealing with family separation, loss, and trauma that children in the foster care system face. We hope this toolkit will be a helpful resource for all of you, providers, practitioners, and organizations in working with Latino grandfamilies to help them better serve these families and fully recognize the challenges they face and strengths that they have. Thank you so much and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Christina. It's been a pleasure working with you this last few months, and really appreciate all your work and that helpful overview that you just provided. My name is Anna Beltran. I work with Generations United, and I am thrilled to share my new title with you as of a month ago, which is Director of the National Technical Assistance Center on Grandfamilies and Kinship Families. Our TA Center is the first of its kind. It's federally supported through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Community Living. With 5 partners and a dozen top experts in an array of social issues, we're going to work proactively with the many systems and community-based agencies impacting grandfamilies in states and in tribes to break down silos and better support all grandfamilies, including Latino grandfamilies. Although we won't be supporting grandfamilies directly, our grand voices are critical subject matter experts in this work, and they'll be with us, providing the technical assistance and informing our work so that we can have a big impact around the country on the systems and organizations that do the direct work. All 3 toolkits, this new one, the African American and American Indian toolkits from last year, and the experts working with us will help ensure that we do all our work in culturally informed, thoughtful ways that help make direct supports accessible to those who may be disabled, be limited English proficient, or simply afraid to interact with systems. I'm someone who didn't speak a word of English in 2nd grade, and I was put in the corner of the classroom with a boy who was severely developmentally delayed. And I know personally, as does that boy, what it feels like to be marginalized and made to feel lesser. And that and my beloved grandma are at the top of my mind every day in doing this work. And it's just a privilege to be having done this for 20+ years with Generations United. So I thank you for joining us today and for all you do on behalf of grandfamilies, and for all of you out there who are grandfamilies, thank you, thank you. It's my privilege to invite 2 of those grand voices that I mentioned, Mercedes Bristol and Anna Laura, to turn on their cameras now so that we can start a conversation and answer some questions that were submitted in advance of today's webinar. So Mercedes and Anna, if I can ask you to turn on your cameras. And I'd like to start with both of you because you bring such special perspectives as Latina grandmothers and kinship caregivers. Anna, can I start with you? And would you please tell us a bit about yourself and your family?
Hi, yes, thank you for having me. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. So my caregiver journey began in 2012. My husband and I became caregivers of 3 nieces and a nephew. We were not prepared to take on these children. We had no idea what was ahead of us, and we learned so much. Every child had different issues. We were close family. We had no idea that what happened at home was happening. The children were removed from their home for neglect. Our oldest niece, who is African American, experienced issues with identity because she was raised by a Mexican family. Our second niece was often beat and struggled with alcohol and drugs as a teenager. My youngest niece was just very quiet, had problems focusing in school, would get a little sad at times. And my nephew struggled the most. We learned has mental health issues that were a serious problem, especially at school. And it took a while for us to learn that was the issue and that he needed services. Every child went through their own journey. They're all adults. They're all doing much better. My nephew reunited with his dad, who then went to go live in Mexico City. His dad was deported. So he went through the trauma of having to learn Spanish and assimilate in that country. He did eventually get back in trouble. He wasn't receiving services for his mental health and returned to the States when we took him back. When he returned in our care, it was an informal placement. And it was a very different experience from the first one because we were unable to provide him the right type of services. Unfortunately, that experience was very negative because for 2 years, we were unable to provide him with mental health services. And I was not, I didn't have any rights as a caregiver to provide him those services. And it just went downhill. So my experience has been very different on both ends, but in a nutshell, that's who I am and that's our journey. And I'm grateful to be here today.
Thank you for sharing that, Anna. I know it's hard to share the personal stories. I find it very challenging. Anyway, Mercedes, I invite you to come off mute and tell us a little what you're comfortable sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to be a voice for Grandfamilies. Of course, my name is Mercedes Bristol. I have 5 grandchildren that I've raised at age 57 without any previous notification. I got four children, and so later on in 9 months, I got one more child. And so by the end of 1 year, I had 5 grandchildren that I needed to take care of. And in my experience was, I was, again, 57 years old, working for my retirement. I worked for the state. I was a case worker for federal and state benefits. And I almost lost my job from the experience I had with the children. I had no clue that 4 of them had ADHD. 2 had oppositional defiance, and 1 had post-traumatic stress disorder. So dealing with those kinds of acronyms, like they call it, or a diagnosis was very difficult for me as a grandmother, not understanding. I didn't understand what those behavior problems were, so I had to learn. What is it? How can I best help them? I remember my 6-year-old was in the 2nd grade. They had to evacuate the classroom because of his dysfunction. And so I started a quest of how can I help these children. And so I joined a support group called Abuelos and Nietos, and that's how I got strength, that there's other grandparents and other families. And this support group was started based on how many Latino grandparents, how many Hispanic grandparents were raising grandchildren. It was a research. And so out of that research came a group of grandparents that met monthly. And so I joined that group. And then we just have the sense that we're not alone, right? There's other grandparents going through the same thing. And so support group has been very important for me, and being in a community with other grandparents that can relate and also can be able to be a support for me, and I be a support for them.
And then you started your own nonprofit, is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about that, Mercedes?
Absolutely. Because of my experience and not knowing where to go for resources, I had no clue Generation United existed, AARP for older relatives, or anything of that nature. I started when Dr. Santos started mentoring me and teaching me of what the resources were, I expressed to her, I said, there has to be other grandparents out there that are in need of getting support. And she mentored me. And so we now have 15 support groups throughout the state of Texas. And we have a nonprofit that I founded. And so we have 4 case specialists that can help other grandparents now. And so we've really grown. The Lord has really opened the doors for us to serve other grandfamilies.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing and telling us about your program. And I'll let you all know that her program, Mercedes' program, is profiled in the new toolkit. So you will learn more there as well, and a link to her website. Thank you. Thank you both. Christina, can I invite you now to come off camera and join our conversation?
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank
you, Christina. So I'll start here with you on this new question. I can't, oh, there you are, great. How can programs authentically engage Latino grandfamilies? What are some good practices that you've seen?
Thank you, Anna. That's such a great question. There are several points of, several thoughts that I have. First, I think access to culturally competent services is really the cornerstone of any effective practice involving Latino families. And so I'll share a few. I think first and foremost, accessibility must be considered. And accessibility can consist of several dimensions. I'd say, first of all, geographically, agencies must consider whether or not families can actually physically travel to or have access to services. So providing telehealth when geographic components are not able to happen. On the psychological level, I think agencies must reassure and ensure that families know that they are a safe place to visit, especially in this restrictive immigration climate. Culturally, agencies must provide content, and the nature of services must be culturally competent and humble in what they offer. And then operationally speaking, I think agencies must also provide conducive services. Services must be financially appropriate. Their hours must, fit within our family's ability to attend. And also agencies must provide trauma-informed services. With that being said, I think hiring bilingual and bicultural staff is key. Using culturally specific and language specific assessment tools is critical. The provision of materials and sources in Spanish and or other indigenous languages is critical. And then lastly, and I think first and foremost, becoming culturally attuned with the variety of Latino populations. We're not a monolith. And so becoming familiar with the fact that there are many nuances to our culture is really important.
Thank you for that. Yes, it's such a diverse population, racially, ethnically, I mean, not ethnically, but racially, culturally, languages, everything. It's very rich. So thank you for that. Anna, how about you? What have you seen as good practices out there?
I would have to say that in my experience, the services that are focusing on rooting out underlying issues are the ones that are most effective. And the reason I say this is because, we have been offered services at times that result in temporary improvement. And I think of a time when my mother used to help us by taking the children to school. But, unfortunately, there were times when she was unable to get my nephew to get ready and actually go to school. So we had an organization, Fred Finch, that actually assigned a caseworker to us. They assigned 2, and they were able to work with my mother to assist her whenever she needed help with my nephew. Services like that make a difference, because what was happening is I was having to run home from work regularly, and that can cost you your job. So that's one example. I can think of another one is I saw someone at one point, he offered services to help them prepare to get their children back. And they're not necessarily understanding, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to, they were simple things like, why do I have to go out and color my hair and get a job? And because in the court, they wanted it was my sister-in-law to look like she was ready to get the children back. But the reasons that were causing her to be unable, those underlying issues weren't being tended to. So sometimes that results in a relapse, and then the whole thing falls apart. So I'm just saying, let's focus on services that are going to really tackle underlying issues.
Thank you, Anna. Mercedes, I bet you've seen all kinds of effective practices and employed some. What are your thoughts on this?
In my experience with myself and with the population that I work with is having the material in the language that they can understand. A lot of, and I'm not stereotyping, but a lot of our families are Hispanic, and they're in their upper ages. So we're now having a generation, that these children over here, that we're missing a generation in the middle, and here we're the top generation. So we're like, we don't understand the language sometimes that the younger children are learning, and the younger workers or the younger professionals are connecting to us. So I think simplifying the materials that they use to help us is one of the ways that I think would help. The other thing is checking with the families. Are they understanding it? Because sometimes we take it for granted that they understand. I put together some processes for some, some of our families in our support groups. And I've noticed that they don't understand what I've already put together. And I thought I simplified it. So just checking back with them, what is it that they don't understand, or how is it that they can best help them to understand that, is what I found is effective for me.
That's really helpful and such an important practice, and something we try to do at Generations United too. When we ask the Grand Voices Network, 70 strong, to look at our materials and make sure that they're accessible. So thank you for that. Mercedes, I'll continue with you. What have you found some of the greatest challenges to be with Latino grand families amongst them?
They don't know how to ask for help. One of their challenges that they tend to want to go with family, but not all family knows for what's the best thing for them. I remember being one of my barriers is childcare, and going to the churches and going to places when I was working and not being, and asking a few times, and after a couple of times they said no, then you just don't ask. And then going to programs, childcare programs or different environments. I remember when I enrolled the kids in school, and the vice principal, enrolled the kids, and she greeted me. I took her the court papers and all of that. And then she said, Miss Bristol, let us know what you need. I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know what all of this package came with, or what we needed to do. I soon learned, it was very difficult for me to go to Walmart and buy all of these school supplies, and a fixed income. So that was one of my barriers, financial. Then the other thing was childcare, and who do you access to help you with those things? So not knowing where to look has been a big barrier for us.
Thank you. Yeah, that's such an important point, that as service providers, they really tell the families what they can offer, and then say, what amongst that can help you? Instead of this big open-ended question that some of us are afraid to answer because we think, well, maybe they'll take the child away, right?
Right.
How about you, Anna? What are your thoughts there?
I think something that I've seen happen is, because some Latino families do value family and they come together, they help one another. They don't usually need help right away because they're working it out amongst themselves. But when they do decide to raise their hand and ask for assistance, they're not always taken seriously. And I see this happen because the appearances, it may be that they've already got it together. they're doing well on their own. And maybe we can put them on the side a little bit so we can focus on families that have a higher need. But the truth is if they raise their hand, it's because they weren't able to figure it out amongst themselves. I've seen that happen, and I think it's a big problem. I also think language and education is key. Sometimes I feel like some Latino families may be perceived as not very intelligent because they're intelligent, but they may not comprehend the language very well. And so it's so critical to have a translator or documents be written in a way that is easy for them to understand, because it's so sad when you see a family make decisions and they weren't fully informed. They didn't understand the consequences because there was a language barrier. Again, not necessarily because they were not intelligent, but it may have been because they just weren't well informed. So it's critical that we have effective translators too, because I've witnessed people translate that are not really being effective.
Thank you. Yeah, I've seen that myself. Mercedes, what, in terms of the cultural strengths, of which there's so many, including this family, then the cultural strength of family that Anna talked about, what are some of the others that can actually help overcome some of these challenges?
Perseverance, people, what I've noticed is in our groups and stuff, it's we encourage people to persevere, giving them hope that by them speaking up, that things will happen, not for them to be so timid and about their situation or about what's going on. One of the things I know is that we feel shame, right? And we feel shame for what we're going through. How did we fail our kids that they are failing their kids? So I think one of the things that we encourage grand families is to persevere, and that they're, they're not alone. And the other thing is that they can give them hope, that there's hope out there that can help them overcome these barriers. So I think the strengths are that if you tap into their strength of being a family, that you did this because you love your grandkids or your nephews or nieces, that gives them a lot of strength.
Beautiful point. Beautiful point. Christina, what are some of the strengths that you've seen in your practice and in your writing about it and your research?
Yeah, thank you. As a practitioner, I actually worked at a Latino-based agency that served families. And one of the main affirmations that the agency held was that, it's in Spanish, it's that la cultura cura, so culture heals. And I remember hearing that for the first time when I walked in the door of this agency and just feeling like that was so affirmative to the values that both I grew up with, as well as many of the families that we were serving. And I know that bringing in culture is just innate to who we are. And so if agencies can draw upon cultural values and strengths, I think that's going to go a long way. And some of those values that Latino families possess innately are collectivist values, as Anna mentioned, doing things together, including the whole family in treatment and or service provision. Bringing in a personal or personalismo values. So being warm, being kind, being gracious with families goes a long way. Also acknowledging faith-based support. Latinos, generally rely upon faith-based support. And so bringing that into the context of service provision is important. I think also just generally including spiritual beliefs, using language, using Spanish when appropriate, all of these things, along with the value of respect, can be great cultural traditions that agencies and providers can use in working to draw out the natural strengths of Latino families.
Thank you for that. Such great strengths and such great tips too. Mercedes, back to you. What do you think are some more things that programs can do to honor those strengths while also helping the families?
I think that one of the things that listening, one of the things that I know is just listening to what they really need. Sometimes sometimes people are talking to us and we're already thinking of the answer without having them complete the sentence or complete what they really, really need. And a lot of times I think as agencies, I know I've gone to ask for help and it's not even what I'm asking for. It's not listening to what I really need. And sometimes being able to let that person just complete what their needs are and not just hear the words, but listen to their body language, look at their expressions. It's just a big changer for me. I know it's like sometimes I've asked for something and it's like, no, I have to stop them. That's not what I was saying. So listening to the need is very, very key.
Thank you. Anna, do you have some other tips for the service providers that are on the webinar today about how they can better serve the families?
I think it's huge what Mercedes just mentioned. I would add to that, it's okay to be honest about your limitations with us.
Mm-hmm.
That is so important. I remember, having experiences where I was just being given the runaround. And I really value when someone can just simply tell me, this is what I can do. These are my limitations. And then we can have a conversation about, okay, so what are my other options if this program is not able to service us? But it's realistic. And I think that we make more progress that way. So I think that is so key. I was ready to give up one of the children for that reason, because I couldn't get the services that I needed. And I was so fortunate to have a social worker assigned to us that was a former foster youth. And she understood my frustrations and she was able to tell me, I can't help you there. That's my limit, but these are your options if you'd like to explore them. And I really value that.
Such a great thing for all of us to keep in mind. Thank you. Christina, we got this question in advance. It's such a good question. How can non-Latino caregivers of Latino children make sure that they stay connected to their culture?
That is a great question. Several points. First of all, I think non-Latino caregivers can simply inquire about valuable cultural traditions that exist. As mentioned before, Latinos are not a monolith. And so it is really important that non-Latino caregivers simply ask the child or children, what constitutes important cultural traditions in your life? For example, they might say something like, what type of events are important for you culturally? When do these events take place? How can we create them or how can we make them happen in this family? In addition to that, I think non-Latino caregivers can ask Latino children about their own cultural identities periodically as these identities may evolve or needs may evolve. I think these caregivers can also foster ways in which children can maintain connections to their culture and family ties. They can create opportunities to remember and or practice a ritual or cultural tradition with a caregiver, or even start a new one. I think at the heart of it really is maintaining curiosity, an investigative and humble attitude, rather than simply relying on stereotypes. And so lastly, I'll just share one aspect you can also do is consult resources, whether it's at that Latino-based agency that's nearby, or consulting books, films, art, music, anything you can to be curious and learn about the heritage, as well as integrating cultural references and narratives into one's family.
Very helpful, thank you. Do either Mercedes or Anna, do you have anything to add? I know you're both Latinas and, but I'm working with other families. Anything you'd like to elevate?
One of the things that in my personal experience was I got the 5 children and the mothers were not Latinos, so the mothers were not of our culture. So when I got, for the children, they were already a little grown up. So it was very difficult for me to instill my values and my traditions to them because they had not lived with me. And so we created. So just understanding that only because they're look like they're Hispanic, they might not have that background. So just connecting again with the caregiver and then working with the caregiver how to integrate, your traditions or the Latino traditions to the actually non Hispanic children that we're getting. So that's what my experience. But I think just knowing who you're speaking to and how you can educate yourself of what that family needs again and what their values are, because my values could be different or my traditions can be different than Anna's, right? So we can just kind of talk about what are the traditions that you have and how can we work with that.
Thank you. Anna, anything to add there?
I think in my case, and I'm sure everyone's going to have their unique situation. The children were actually, they're actually half Mexican. And as I mentioned in the beginning, my oldest niece is African American. So in our household, it was all about having an open mind. And I actually did make it a point to learn more about what my eldest niece wanted to learn more about her culture. She joined a club at school, an African American club. I had to learn where to take her to get her hair done. And then I would ask permission from the parent. Do you want them to go to a Catholic church? Do you want them, we would talk about these things at home, but it was inclusive. Like everyone had an opinion. No one was forced to do anything. But if any of the children wanted to learn, we made that possible for them.
That's great. Thank you. Mercedes, I know that you have a number of support groups that you run and manage. How can an organization determine if it should have a support group that's specific to Latino grandfamilies?
I think what we did is we did a survey and to find out, how many Latinos or how many, because we needed to get a bilingual facilitator for those groups. And because we started them in English, and then we decided, we knew that there were, once I joined, it was a bilingual one. But when I started mine, we were doing them in English. So then we did a survey, how many Hispanic grandparents were attending. And so that's what one of the things I did is doing a survey and finding out their needs. The other surveys that we've done is what are their needs? And in the last year, they change from year to year. In the last year, it has been mental health and legal, because some of these grandparents do get the children without any legal paperwork. So they can't take them for medical appointments. They can't take them and register them to school. So one of their biggest financial to get it legal, and then the other one has been, their mental health for the children and the grandparents to be able to handle the situation, especially with this COVID transition. So doing surveys has been my biggest information.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. This has been such a rich conversation. And I just want to end by asking each of you if there's one thing you want people to walk away with today from this conversation. So I'll start with you, Christina.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, I've had such a powerful experience, both speaking to Anna and Mercedes and others about the experience of being a caregiver, a Latino grandfamily caregiver. And so I would say we must advocate and empower for the needs of Latino families who are serving as caregivers. I think that it's clear evidence in both of their experiences that they stepped up in desperate times of need to serve their own family's well-being. And oftentimes these families don't have the financial, practical, or emotional support at hand. And so I think it's critical that we advocate for their practical mental health and support needs on all levels within organizations, at the policy level and at the practice level, so that we can make sure to support their well-being, as well as the family's quality of life.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anna?
Well, I would just like to say that I know it's hard to balance the workload because we're all human. And in my experience, I've seen on both ends, people are tired. There's a lot of paperwork, and that boggles down the experience, right? It takes away from what you really want to do quickly, which is take care of the family to help the kids. But all I want to say is that you make a difference, and we can tell when you are really able to help us. And when your hands are tied, it's okay to be honest and advocate for us when we're not there. If your hands are tied and you can't help a family, it's okay to let them know, and please think of us and advocate for us, because at the end of the day, this is for the children and their long-term happiness, their health is at stake.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Mercedes, I'll give you the last word.
Thank you. I totally agree with Anna and with Christina. Yes, I just would like for all of you to take away how powerful you are, how much influence you have for these families, because when we come to you, we're looking for you to help us, and for you to have that much power to say, you know, I can find, you know, the solution for this person. Just the passion. I know you're in this service because you're passionate. You know, we're not caregivers because we just don't know have anything else to do. I believe that every caregiver is a passionate person that wants to take care of that family and do the best that they can. So, but you have a lot of power, much more than you think. When I started doing this work, I was just a little grandmother, I used to think. And now I'm an advocate, you know, and when I hear, you know, I'm connected with Generations United, which is a powerful, you know, organization. That's who you are. You know, you are someone that can make a difference. And knowing that if you don't know where to find, you can always ask somebody else, you know, how can I best help this person that has A, B, or C need? And that's where I think that the passion and the power that you have is amazing. And I just want to thank every one of you for even being on this webinar to listen and to learn how to best serve us, you know, because that is where the heart is. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank all three of you so much for sharing and for working on these issues and for helping your families. It's a privilege to work with each of you. And I'd like to thank the lively chat that's going on, and know that all of us at Generations United are resources to you, and we hope that you find the toolkit very helpful. I will now turn it back over to Lynette to continue our conversation. Lynette?
Thank you so very much. Oh my goodness, the wisdom that we are hearing this afternoon, and just the amazing comments. I am just so struck by each of you. I so appreciated all of these comments, and I can't help myself but to reflect back a few of the pieces that I heard that I just really resonated with me, and just so appreciate the honoring and respectful insights and the strengths that were really amplified in the conversation this afternoon. And Mercedes, your beautiful comments around perseverance, and Anna, you speaking into this truth about being honest with your limitations in us as you were speaking about those that are service providers. And Dr. Lovato, I am going to carry this with me, la cultura cura. You know, that culture heals. And I think a lot of that is what we're speaking about through these reports, is really focusing on what our families, what our children, and what our shared cultures and individual cultures bring to the table that translate into strength. So I just want to thank you so much, Anna, and thank you, Christina and Mercedes and Anna, for all the insights that you shared with us today. And thank you all for attending today's event. It has been terrific. Also, I'm also reading through the chat as I was listening to these amazing individuals speak and present today. As we mentioned earlier, the toolkit is currently live on the Generations United website, www.gu.org. And we will drop the direct link in the chat again now. Once you have had a chance to read through the toolkit, we would really, really appreciate it if you could fill out the feedback surveys that are linked on those toolkit web pages. It's so helpful for us to receive that. These surveys allow us to better tailor future resources and to ensure they are most useful to grand families and to the field. We invite you to view, share, and download the toolkit and use it as a tool in your work on behalf of grand families. We also encourage you to take a look at the recommendations in the toolkit and implement them in your work. And these recommendations include things like collecting data on grand families and disaggregate it by race and ethnicity for both families inside and outside the child welfare system. When disparities or overrepresentation is discovered in the data, make a plan to address the disparity and more equitably serve grand families. Ensure that parents who are under threat of detention or deportation have useful legal mechanisms to give other family members the legal authority to care for children. Improve grand families' access to eligible federal programs by simplifying the process and ensuring that each state has opted into providing health insurance for eligible qualified immigrant children. Adhere to existing federal law concerning foster care licensure and do not impose additional immigration standards. I want to close with a message Grand Voices Mercedes Bristol shares in the toolkit. She shares, "We all deserve the chance to have the support we need to care for our grandchildren. We truly hope that this toolkit will give you the tools and resources to ensure grand families get the support they deserve." Thank you all again for joining us today. I hope you're leaving this afternoon as inspired as I am. Thank you all.